Hey everyone, this is Pete. Welcome back to Atari ST A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari ST games, some of which I grew up with and some which are new to me. This is Ghouls and Ghosts by Capcom, ported by... it wasn't ported by US Gold, it was published by US Gold over here. I actually forget the name of the developer who brought it over here. But anyway, this is another good example of an arcade port on the Atari ST and what that meant. Those of you who watched my episode on the Eliminator as well may also remember my story about playing games at my brother's girlfriend's father's house on her 1 megabyte STFM. And this is one of those games that I used to play there back in the day. Because this is a game that didn't work on a 512k machine. So I couldn't play this, because at the time we just had a 520 ST. And so it was an exciting and rare treat when I got to go over to their house and play this game, among other things like Eliminator and such like. Ouch! There was also a port of Ghosts and Goblins as well, which was actually developed by someone completely different. But yeah, they were both actually pretty good ports. Again, as with things like Double Dragon and stuff that we've seen previously, by no means arcade perfect or anything like that, but certainly perfectly playable and enjoyable. This game's always stuck with me over the years for the music. And the music in this, I don't think was in sort of the arcade version or even the Super NES version, which is probably the most well-known version of it these days. But the music in this has always stuck with me just because it was a really great example of what the ST sound chip was actually capable of. As I've mentioned a couple of times previously on this series, the Atari ST sound chip was just a simple PSG chip, very similar to what there was in systems like the Sega Master System and such like. So it's very primitive and limited compared to the capabilities of systems like the Commodore Amiga and such like. So the Commodore Amiga had the ability to have 4 channels of digital sound, which explains why a lot of its music sounds like sort of mod tracker music, because it basically is. Whereas the ST is synthesizing these sounds on the fly. And if you didn't really know how to make good use of that sound chip, then it would sound like complete garbage. And it would actually sound worse than its predecessor, the Atari 8-bit. But when you had a sound team who knew what they were doing, as was the case with this game, yeah, they could really make that sound chip sing. Yep. Actually, no, let's not continue because we're on the first level, so there's no point, is there? But yeah, if you watched my episode on Double Dragon 2 a while back, you may remember some of the things I mentioned about arcade ports and the like in the 16-bit and 8-bit era. They were often quite limited. The experience tended not to be very customizable, and you tended to have to get by on not very many credits, limited credits. So you've probably already seen in that we've got just 2 credits to make it through this game. And if you've ever played Ghouls and Ghosts, you know that that is quite an undertaking. Especially if you're as bad at it as I apparently am. Oddly enough, this is one of those games I liked for a really strange reason, a very strange, very specific reason back in the day. And that was the fact that the ground had hills. And that might sound like a strange reason to like a game, but you have to understand that in these relatively early days of gaming, you couldn't take anything for granted. So things that we take for granted today, and even sort of a little bit later into the 16-bit console era and stuff like that, even stuff like the ground having undulations in it like it does in this, smooth undulations rather than steps. That was kind of a big deal. Especially if you had sort of previously encountered console games and didn't have a console of your own. Because that then meant when something like this came along, that you could feel like you having an experience a little bit closer to what your friends with consoles were having. Because the strangest things became sources of jealousy and envy back in the day. Like I say, today you probably don't think that having undulations in the ground in a 2D platformer is a big deal. But, yeah. In 1988, yeah, that was a huge deal to me. I cared a lot. And I was always a little bit frustrated when there were games that sort of looked like they had undulations in the ground, but they actually turned out to be steps. So, something like Fantasy World Dizzy by Codemasters is a good example of that. That technically has undulations in its terrain, but the way they work, the way they're actually implemented, is as if they're steps rather than a smooth curve like we've got here. And I found that a bit frustrating. I was a strange child, what can I say? Those of you who know me now probably won't be surprised to hear that. But, you know, everyone's a bit weird when they're a kid. Everyone has their own strange, weird preferences. So, going back to... Oops. Death. Going back to what I was talking about on the Double Dragon 2 video. This is another example of limitations in the control scheme coming into play. So you probably noticed a few times while I'm trying to sort of jump and fire, I end up shooting into the sky as well. That's because once again we are using a single button controller, and the fire button is reserved for, well, firing. Which means that we don't have a button for jumping. In order to jump, we have to push up. However, if you press fire and up, you shoot upwards, which can be a little bit awkward. So what you have to do is tap up to jump, let go of up, and then press the fire button. Otherwise, you'll just shoot straight upwards, which is undesirable. It's not always undesirable, but in this particular circumstance it is. Oh my god, I am so bad at this game. I am so sorry. But anyway, even with my badness, hopefully this is giving you an idea of the sort of standard of games that we could expect from sort of arcade and console ports back in the day. So this was always highlighted as a particularly good one, and I agree with that assessment even today. This is a solid game that plays well. It's enjoyable. It is difficult, but then I'd expect nothing less from an arcade game. Particularly one in the Ghouls and Ghosts series. As I say, I have some fond memories attached to this one as well. So, one of those games, it was a rare treat to get to play. How do we deal with him? Like that. With dodgy collision detection, that's how we deal with him. Oh no! Oh, that was going so well as well. I'm going to go back to the start again. Yeah, this is one of many games from the era that I believe I played quite a bit and never actually cleared the first level of. The reasons for that are probably self-evident as you're watching this. But I enjoyed it nonetheless, just because of the music and the graphics. And that sense that I was playing something like I'd play on a console, but on my Atari ST. As I say, that might sound like a strange thing to say these days, when today's home computers are technologically very superior to our consoles. Oh no, that was terrible. But yeah, back in the day, it was really cool to have a console-style experience on your home computer. What is this? Not enormously helpful. I mean, those flames could be good, but it was probably a mistake to pick this up. Oh no! Oh. Right, I'll have one more attempt at this after this, and then I will spare you any further embarrassment. Because I know that all those elite pro Ghouls and Ghosts players who are watching me are just getting incredibly frustrated right now. Oh, a new weapon. Daggers. And dead. Right, one more try. Oh, I got a high score. That's how good I am. See, at least this game acknowledges that it's incredibly difficult by allowing you to get a high score having progressed barely further than halfway through the first level. Part of the trouble with this game is that you seem to be limited in how far backwards you can run at any given point. So there'll be times when you're trying to run away from something and you'll just run into an invisible wall. Which is a little bit odd, but again, I guess it's one of those things you just have to sort of learn to deal with as you play the game. Little idiosyncrasies. As I say, this version of the game would have been one that was programmed from scratch rather than sort of directly ported using existing assets and such like. And so it's almost certainly got its own little quirks that weren't in the original version. Oh dear. Like I say, there is a pretty good version of Ghosts and Goblins on the ST as well. That was developed by someone different. I think that was developed by Elite, if I remember correctly. And because that was an earlier game, that sort of felt a bit more primitive than this. Like it didn't have undulations in the ground. Oh my god. So it was terrible. No, it wasn't. It was a good port, actually. But and that was actually my first contact with this series. So I didn't even know it was an arcade game until later. That was the case with a lot of things. As I said back in the Double Dragon 2 video, arcade culture here in the UK was never really a big thing anywhere other than the seaside. And at the seaside you tended to sort of have the big gimmicky things like sort of hydraulic outrun and afterburner cabinets and such like. And it was much more rare to see smaller scale standalone things like Ghosts and Goblins and that sort of thing. And so there are a lot of games from the era that were arcade games originally, but I just never knew, just because my first and only experience with them was as a home computer game, or a console game a little bit later. So again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because as I've said before, that allows you to judge those home ports on their own merits, rather than whether they are a technically good port of the arcade machine. Which I think is probably for the best. At least it was back when these were current. Because it meant that you weren't sort of bogged down with expectations. Well, that's impossible. Okay, anyway, that is Ghouls and Ghosts. I won't torture you any further by making you watch me struggle against that first level. But yeah, that is a good game for the Atari ST if you ever have the opportunity to give it a go and you're interested in the series. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue a small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.